Welcome back to How China Works. I'm Brendan Davis. Your co-host, Ying Li, will be with us in just a few moments. Our guest today is Dr. Parag Khanna, and Dr. Khanna wears many hats. As a strategic advisor and consultant to global companies and governments, he's been a TED talker, a speaker, a world traveler with both data and experientially based insights into a host of pressing global issues, and he is an author. His most recent book is called The Future is Asian, and in this book he discusses not just the well-trod Asian century concept, which many people have spoken about, but he seeks to have what he called kind of a pan-Asian conversation. The goal is to look at how the entire world is becoming, in his words, Asian-ized. Now, Dr. Khanna has been on a speaking and consulting tour through China specifically recently, and Ying Li caught up with him after one of his events just the other day for this interview. From there, he went on to speak with Liu Shen, who is the host of CGTN's The Point. She has become famous recently in the U.S. for her ongoing dialogue with Trish Regan from Fox News, among other things. So he's really kind of having a moment with this book, and we are very glad to get him on the show right now. His LinkedIn page reveals a widely varied background. It ranges from education at Georgetown University to the London School of Economics for his PhD. He spent time as a senior fellow at think tanks such as the New America Foundation. He served as a managing partner, advisor, founder, or CEO at companies from New York to Singapore. Among his more personal interests are roles helping smart startups that are focused on improving the health of kids and opportunities for kids around the world. And I thought that was especially notable. All in all, I think this was a great, really valuable talk, and we look forward to doing another one with Dr. Khanna in the future. For now, though, please enjoy this talk between Dr. Parag Khanna and my amazing co-host, Ying Li.
Thank you so much, Mr. Parag Khanna. Your Chinese name is?
Kang Shi He.
Kang Xi He. We talk a little bit more about that later. But thank you so much for being on our show. This is Ying Li, the co-host of How China Works. And it's a wonderful opportunity here. Like tonight in Beijing, we are sitting together to share particular about relevant topics about China and the world. And more specifically, we always start with a question that is kind of like deep.
Right.
We start the hardest, just joking.
Right.
So the first question for you is, why? What make you start writing a book particularly about the future is Asian? What's inspired you?
Well, this book is really a continuation of my previous book, and my previous book is a continuation of the book before that, and that book is a continuation of the first. So for me, it's always a very long narrative, right? And it begins basically with when I was 12 years old and the Berlin Wall fell down. And the Berlin Wall fell down 30 years ago this year. So for me, it's a kind of special anniversary because I went to the Berlin Wall when it fell down. So I was there right afterwards. So it changed my whole life. You know, everything that I have done for 30 years has basically been because I was inspired by that moment, you know, to study geopolitics, to travel. I went to high school in Germany, you know, so I speak German. I traveled around Europe, and, you know, all of my writings are based on my own reporting and reportage and research that I get from interviewing people, hundreds and hundreds of people, and, you know, traveling a lot. So, you know, to me, I've just always known that I want to travel, you know, and to research in that way. I'm also an academic, so I do, you know, a lot of systemic research about global trends. So this book, you know, I think was very important for me to do for a couple of reasons, because a lot of the writing about Asia doesn't understand Asia, right? It focuses only on Japan or only on China, and it doesn't give the big picture. And so I wanted to give the big Asian picture. Then I wanted to explain how, if it's the Asian century, right? And a lot of people have written books about the Asian century, but they only explain what they think is happening in Asia. I wanted to explain how the rest of the world is becoming Asian-ized. And that is something that was missing also. So there are many motivations that I had. So for me, it was very, you know, it was a very exciting project to work on.
What would be the differences between the reactions from the audience from the East and the West?
Right.
More specifically, because you are from
I was born in India.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. I mean, the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life was to write chapter 2 of this book. So chapter 2 of this book is called History of the World,
one of my favorite
an Asian View. And it was almost impossible to summarize 4,000 years of Asian history in 40 pages, right? And it took me like 1 year of work to do this chapter, also with a lot of support and help and research and material that was given to me. But I had to write all of it, of course, and I had to make sense of it. And I had to come up with a framework for being fair to China, to India, to Iran, to Southeast Asia, Japan, all of the countries and civilizations of Asia. I wanted to give equal, fair treatment and also be chronologically accurate over time. But more importantly, not just to list facts, I wanted to fit it in a framework. And the framework is the subtitle of the book: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture. So for each period of history, what were the commercial relations, what were the conflictual relations, and what were the cultural relations between all of these Asian civilizations? So it was so complicated and difficult and literally painful to do. It was so hard. But in the end, I did it, and I'm very glad I made the effort, because the response to that chapter and the response to the book has been overwhelmingly positive.
They also showcase one fact that people are in need of that, need of that hidden treasure of revealing cultures, revealing civilization. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And so the feedback from Western countries has been this awakening that Asia is so big, and it's not just China, and that the modernization is happening so quickly, not just the rich countries of Northeast Asia. So people appreciated all of those things. And in Asia, I think most of all, Asians are appreciating learning about other Asians. Because, if you're Chinese, you don't read a lot about India or about Japan or about Russia or about Iran or about Indonesia. And you definitely don't read about all of those places in one book. So, and if you're Indian, you don't read a lot about China or about Japan or about Australia or Russia, right? But here I did it in one book. So I wanted every Asian to be on the same page. That's the expression we use, right? To be on the same page means that we now have a common understanding of the past right up to the minute, right? So this book begins 4,000 years ago, but in a way it really also begins 30 years ago with the post-Cold War period. And then it takes the data from 2017, right up to almost now.
Right.
And also projects what will happen next for Asia. So I wanted us all to have one Asian conversation. And that has not happened in a long time. The idea of a common Asian conversation or view is almost impossible. But there have been periods of history, like during the Silk Roads, right? When Asians did trade a lot with each other and conversed a lot with each other, but not in one conversation. So I was really trying, to be quite ambitious.
Do you feel lonely in doing particular job like this? While you were doing research, of course, they're challenging, but of course, there's a lot of rewarding moments for you to discover something new all the time, right?
Yeah. It's much more fun to just travel. It's much more fun to, drive for thousands of miles and stop and see beautiful places and to interview people and have lots of nice meals and coffees and to meet ministers and presidents. The hard part, the painful part, the lonely part is writing.
Oh.
And to be honest with you, I hate writing. But what do you do when you collect so much material?
Right.
I have thousands of pages of notes from all of my conversations and observations. And you see, I have a little notebook I carry around and I fill it every day. I can fill a full notebook with things that I see and hear and so forth. So I feel obligated to write it down to always write it down, and then I have to type it up, and then I have to make sense of it, and I have to fit it in the framework. And so, you wind up with very long books, and then they have to be edited, and they get cut in half. And then that's even more painful, because after you write it, you feel like you're attached to it, and then your editor says, "This is terrible, cut it in half." So look, it is lonely, it's painful, but you learn so much, and you're forced to refine and improve your ideas.
It does not only take intelligence, it does not only take your passion, it takes discipline.
It's a lot of discipline.
So because when I would say the first time I encountered your post, your name, and your news, your links about the book was through LinkedIn.
Right.
So I remember there's a moment whenever I open my LinkedIn app and website, I saw your post over there. Right. You're really working very hard in producing content.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, during this whole process, what drives you most? What really, do you have a specific methodology? Do you have a specific role to follow when you want to make it?
I think it depends on what kind of book I'm writing. So my first book was all reportage from 45 countries. So I was just traveling, and I was writing while I was traveling, and I would write at night, I would write in trains, I would write in huts, I would just keep on working for years, right? And then other books are more academic, so I don't have to travel so much. I just have to focus on the literature and the reading and the ideas and the argument, and those don't involve a lot of interviews, so every book has a different approach to how to do it. My next book that I'm writing, that will come out in 2 years, is really about the world's youth. So everyone under the age of 30. So I refuse to talk to anyone who's over 30 for the research. I only talk to young people, right? And the attitudes, the priorities, the ideas that shape them are so different from older people, right? Even people who are 40 or 45. So, to me, then there's a book like that, you have to talk to people. You have to, the methodology is talking, listening. So really every book has a very different kind of approach to it.
Wow, that's amazing. I would say this episode serves another function or big role of helping people to understand how people like you read books.
It's also like tennis. I'm a fanatic tennis player. You're playing different people, but you have to play different ways to beat different people, right? You can't just play the same way.
I guess
so writing book is like that, right?
I guess on this trip, your mind is more and more open, and you attract more and more open-minded people to share with you. I guess that would be like a good circle.
I think that would be a virtuous circle. And I tell you, you were asking about the reaction to the book. For me, my best audience in the world is always expatriates, right? So anyone who lives outside of their country of birth. So you've studied in America, you've traveled all over India and Turkey and Brazil, right? So you are like, you live in China again, but you have been an expatriate. So no matter what I'm writing about, I find that people who are expatriates, it could be a European living in Asia, an American living in London, right? Any kind of expatriate is always someone who supports my arguments. Almost all expatriates I've found, there's this expression we have in America, someone just gets it. Which means they intuitively understand you and what you're saying. Yeah. And I feel like there is a global tribe of expatriates. It's actually 250 million people.
Do you believe there are people actually working on it to study about it? Do you think it could be a good research topic for people to start to pay attention to?
Well, to be honest, a lot of people have looked at different nationalities and their diasporas.
Right.
Not many people have written about the entire global community of expatriates. I have written about it. Now I will make that a big part of my next book, because youth are moving like never before.
This generation.
Exactly. So the interesting thing about Chinese millennials is that in my writing and research about mobility is not just when you cross a border, right? And in China, you have a special situation because Chinese people did not have mobility until hukou reform, right? So now with the hukou reform, just moving inside your own country is a kind of migration. And, a lot of Chinese people didn't know what life is like in Shanghai. And now you live in Shanghai or Beijing, right? So in America, it's different. You really have a full awareness of what the rest of your country is like, even if you don't move and stuff. And of course, it's not illegal to move, right? So now you have the situation of these 400 million Chinese millennials moving in China. But of course, more than 100 million Chinese people travel abroad every year also, right? Which is another very big number. It's 150 million in total. Not all young people, but tourists, travelers, business people.
Yeah, exactly.
So 150 million Chinese go outside of China and come back every single year. And the number is growing and growing and growing. So to me, I will look at the Chinese population in two ways, really. The internal mobility and the kind of external mobility. And so for me, it's a very interesting study. And then there's the permanent Chinese expatriate population. There's several million Chinese in America. There's several million Chinese in Europe. So to me, the Chinese population is very, very interesting to study.
What kind of impact do you believe in the coming future that this particular group will bring to the perception to the world about Chinese?
I mean, it depends, honestly. It depends on where and who, because, Chinese students have been a very important economic contributor in Britain and Canada and America, billions of dollars into the economies because of Chinese students, tuition money and so forth. Obviously, it's culturally enriching as well because you have a lot more exchange. You have so many American families that have, sort of gotten to know China through Chinese students that live in their homes, that rent from them, or Chinese students who are the students of professors and so forth. So people, have this cultural communication. And now, of course, so many Americans are learning Chinese, and now they have friends in China because they met Chinese who came and studied in America. So a lot of this is happening, and I think that's organically a great story. But then that's only a couple of million people. But then you also have, of course, Chinese workers all over Africa and Latin America. You have Chinese people working in state-owned enterprises, right? I mean, there's many Chinese of different kinds doing different things in different places. So, it's the largest diaspora in the world. So it's hard to generalize about the impact that it's having. It depends on the country.
You have been to China before, right? Many times.
Yeah.
So this particular time you deliver a speech here, have you heard about any kind of comments from the Chinese, more specific the Chinese young people? What kind of reaction do they have when you're talking about the futurization? Like what kind of, do they have more like questions, or do they have more anticipation for sort of direction that when you're talking about certain things?
It's very interesting. I think that a lot of Chinese young people, if they have not left China, then the things that I'm saying are very new to them. Because even though they have a very high standard of living, there's a cliche or a stereotype about young Chinese people. They're very consumerist and materialist. If they haven't left China, then they've just been, going to bars and having a good life and, spending money. And they're not paying attention to geopolitics and regional economics and so forth. So when they see my argument, they're just shocked that there's so much going on outside of China because they haven't left China. But of course, if they have left China, then they're full of curiosity because then they say, oh, like you've been to India, or others say, I've been to Russia, or they've been to America, or they've been to Europe. And then they have an observation from their own life that usually reinforces something that they've read from what I've written or something like that. So again, an expat is someone who sympathizes with, my argument. But I find in many countries, of course, there are a lot of people who've just never left home, A lot of Americans have never left America. A lot of Indians have never left India. Of course not. They can't afford it, right? So depending on where I am and what the background is of the person, you have very different generalizations or preconceived notions, about other places. Media plays a huge role. Media is the conduit, the portal for most people for their knowledge about the world. And so I'm not familiar with the Chinese media in terms of what kids, young people are watching. Are they watching CGTN, CCTV? Are they watching international news? Are they listening to international radio programs? Are they, reading about foreign events on, Baidu or WeChat? I don't know if they do that. I don't know if you have statistics about that and what their opinions are. So it's very, very hard to say. But again, I imagine that China being such a big country, a big market, there's only 24 hours in a day. And if you're on, 10 WeChat groups with your friends and you're studying in university and you have a busy social life and, all these things, I don't really see how foreign news would be a priority for a young Chinese person who's never going to leave China, So I think that there's maybe a complacency about the world. Of course, that British people are the same and American people are the same. Japanese people are very much the same. There's a lot of data about how Japanese people have stopped traveling abroad. In the West, we used to joke in the 1980s and 1990s about the hordes of Japanese tourists clicking with their cameras and now we don't see that anymore. Japanese they're happy at home, basically. Now we have Chinese everywhere, right? Clicking with their cameras.
And selfie
and selfie sticks, right?
Do you find technology at this particular moment is playing a more and more or increasingly, invisible hand, but a kind of like important hand in shaping our perception about certain place and certain matters, certain international geopolitical things?
Sure. But technology is just the means, again, it's the tool, it's the instrument. But the content is the interesting thing, in China, you don't have all of the foreign sources of news. In America, you can watch lots of different news from lots of different countries, but people don't actually watch it. So, again, one could say that there's an equal or mutual degree of lack of awareness, Europeans are much more connected to each other and to the world. So I think they probably pay more attention to global news, but they are not a superpower, so they don't do anything about it. So every part of the world has its positives and negatives, obviously, right?
Yeah, we touched a little bit about this millennials connection or disconnection with the geopolitical or bigger macro picture of the world, right? What would be the best way, what best suggestion you could give for millennials if you really, because that's something very, very important for younger generation to pay attention to. Develop a bigger vision.
I think that young people could read more about the world, of course, but my prescription is the obvious one. It's travel more, right? I would like to see, and I say this to young people all the time. Young students, graduate students, always come to me and say, I want to work in the United Nations or the World Bank or in my organization. And I say, no. I have one advice for you, travel, learn another language, travel, do not work in an office, do not sit behind a desk, do not work for anyone, go and travel. And that's who I am. That's the advice I give people. And I have a foundation that actually gives grants to young people to travel, just to give them the money they need to travel, to do projects for research and to help them publish, articles and observations and things like that. So I do think it's the most important thing. I do think it is the most important thing.
You are building very important bridges.
But for them, and I hope that that's what they do, and I want to help them. I want to help them to do it.
And you travel to China pretty often, right?
Yeah, I've been coming to China for 15 years.
15 years.
Yeah,
So what was the early experience when you were here?
Well, my first experience, I've actually always had good visits to China. And I've been, more than 20 times to China. And I've been all over China. But the first trip was the most special because I basically drove across most of China in like a Jeep, And the most special part was Western China because the development was not yet really happening. It was very rugged and raw, and unspoiled. And I remember, I'll never forget it. It's the best road trip I've ever done in my life. And I've done many tens of thousands of miles of road trips, but this was the best. So to go across Western China, like Tibet, Xinjiang, I think you call it Xizang.
Xizang, Tibet, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And Xinjiang. And I say it was a road trip, but there were no roads. When we were driving in 2006 in these areas, sometimes we would see the Chinese PLA, the People's Liberation Army, building roads, but we were driving on the mountainside while they were building roads because there was no road. And sometimes our truck would get stuck in a river and their trucks would get stuck in rivers. And everyone has to help everyone just to get the truck out of the river. And, sometimes there's a landslide on a mountain and you just have to drive down the side of a mountain and hope that you don't tumble and die. And so that was special. And we made it. And there are no proper roads connecting Tibet and Xinjiang. You have to just find your way. That was then. So it was really special. And it is, I honestly think, and I've been, everywhere in the world, it's the most beautiful place in the whole world.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, especially young people, including myself, love traveling much more often all over the world. So if you could give any particular suggestion for travelers, young travelers,
right,
who are very eager to connect with the world, to do something like what you do, do you have any specific example or specific suggestion like for them to follow?
Well, it depends on what career path they're on. Are they in journalism? Are they in business, diplomacy, whatever the case may be? But when it comes to like business, young entrepreneurs, I think we need a active problem-solving culture. China has solved a lot of big problems in a big scale. And you have to remember that, as I also say in the book, there's 2.5 billion other Asians. And a lot of them are poor. And, they need clean technology. They need water that they can drink. They need, good quality roads. They need schools, hospitals. They need some of the technologies. Those countries don't have WeChat. You cannot do everything on their apps, So there's so many things where
for travelers to bring to the region, the culture. To bring,
to teach, again, build those bridges and so forth. It's funny because for Americans, it's popular and respected to join the Peace Corps, right? You go and you work in villages or you teach English or something like that. But maybe the Chinese need a Peace Corps, right? Where young Chinese go and teach English and work in villages and so forth. And you build a lot of camaraderie. You build a lot of soft power, and I think, again, there's a lot of Chinese all over the world doing physical labor and, doing, construction projects.
Right, especially in Africa, right?
Yeah, but, there's also a whole social dimension that can be done as well.
Yeah, like communication, like helping the communities and build a relationship with locals. That's what we always mention. We do not just travel, we need to engage.
Right.
And
good point. Yeah.
Engage with this problem solving. I think there's so much things in the world right now problematic. I would say the pollution, the global warming, and the poverty thing.
Yeah.
So what basically you were sharing with us was, if this is the common ground and the Chinese can also build with outside the world.
Yeah.
And do you believe that this could be something by traveling more to outside of China, outside the world?
I think it's the only way, yeah. But here's what I want to see most of all. I want to see Asians traveling in each other's countries, right? I want to see Indians in China. I want to see, Chinese in Russia and Japanese in China and Japanese in India and, Chinese in Indonesia and Indians in Indonesia and Indonesia's in Korea and Vietnamese in Japan. That's what I want to see. I want to see a lot more of this intra-Asian integration because I think we have to deal with each other as Asians every day more and more. And I still think there's a very strong lack of, sort of mutual knowledge. We all know Hollywood actors and movies. We all know English Premier League soccer teams. We all listen to, certain pop bands and music. But yet we still don't know a lot about our own neighbors. I think that's very strange.
I really like, especially the name of your book, The Future is Asian. And if you could use one last sentence starting with I hope, 我希望, it's because hope is part of your Chinese name. As we mentioned about that, 康熙和 is Kang and 希望 hope. 和 means peace and harmony, right? So if you could start with one final words for our audience, I hope.
I really hope that Asian countries help each other solve the severe environmental problems that they have, right? We have, as you know, in China, you can have polluted rivers. We have, rising sea levels. We have erosion of farmland, very, very serious environmental problems. And it will take trillions of dollars and a real shift of mentality, attitudes, and policies to deal with this situation. And it's not enough for China to fix China, right? Or India to fix India. It's a very serious regional issue.
Collective.
It has to be a collective issue.
Labor. Collective.
So that would be my biggest hope for Asia, for something that doesn't exist yet in Asia, which is true environmental cooperation.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a pleasure.
Okay, that's our show this week. Please visit HowChinaWorksPodcast.com for more information on Dr. Khanna and our other great guests. You can also reach out to Ying Li or myself via the contact page there and let us know what you're thinking or if we can help you with something somehow. And don't forget to please rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and share this with friends who you think would also enjoy it. On behalf of my co-host Ying Li, I'm Brendan Davis, and we'll see you next week on How China Works.